One thing that I love about COS is all of our different stories. And our stories of how we got here and how we come to be a part of a family are as unique and as individual as each one of us is. But I do know that many of our stories have themes, have commonality. And I know some of us, our story came from growing up and being in a very destructive theological and Christian environment and kind of going through that pain and that damage and finding a more progressive, accepting, and inclusive community here. And my story would share some of those themes. I grew up in, at one point, what I would have said was a conservative background. Now I would say fundamentalist. The thing about being a fundamentalist is you don't know you're a fundamentalist. No one passes out the pamphlet or flyer, you didn't get the information packet. You figure that out piece by piece. You have to be a detective on yourself. I went to a conservative Bible college, and I was a minister in that tradition for a while. And actually, my two best friends in the world, we all met in Bible college and came from that world, and we've all exited that history. But of course, we're different people, and so we've come out in different places. And one of my friends, we were on staff at the same church together. I was the minister to adults, and he was the minister to children and youth. And even though it was a fundamentalist environment, fundamentalists can be nice, right? They can be friendly, kind people. They can also be have a dysfunctional. And so this church was not so nice and not so friendly sometimes. It was very destructive and damaging, and so we kind of went through that as basically children. And so we come out on the other end, and he's a little perplexed at me that I would still identify as Christian, that I would still introduce my children to a Christian story, and that I would still be a part of a faith community. And his question to me the past couple of years has been, man, when you don't go to church, you get 2 Saturdays. And the point is, the second Saturday is pretty awesome. And I do not understand why you do not participate in second Saturday. It's a valid point. He's not wrong. And I've not always had an articulate answer for him. One reason is because in the tradition we came from, and I know many of you have been in the same situation, the idea is that you need to be very sure of your worldview. And not only you need to be content and sure of your worldview, you need to get someone else to believe what you believe. And in order to get them to believe what you believe, you need to make sure you have all these rational answers on why your way is the best and their way is wrong. So having answers to questions becomes a very important thing. And because of that past, I'm not interested in anymore. One thing I remember from college is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of a Highly Effective Person, and what's in your circle of influence. And I quickly realized that changing someone's beliefs is not within my circle of influence. And so I'm just not interested in doing it anymore. I'm not interested in making you believe something that I believe, and I'm not interested in having all the answers. So that's one of the reasons I don't have an answer for him. Another one is because I've been in process and transition, and I didn't always have an answer the past couple of years of why I was still hanging on to the Christian story and why I was a part of COS. But I felt like I should come up with an answer, not to try to convince him or not to try to get him to belong to a church or something like that. I thought that I should probably come up with an answer for my children. Because my children ask me quite frequently, why do we go to church? And my answer has been, well, our people have done it for 2,000 years, and we will do it for another Sunday. And that's got some gravitas behind it, right? That's some weight. Especially, I like to say my people, because that makes it seem a little bit more, important. But I felt like, although that is a good answer, and as a parent, I stand by it, and feel free to use it. But I feel like I should probably, especially as they're getting older, not in an effort to indoctrinate or brainwash them, but as they're going to try to get older and make decisions for themselves, and they're going to have to one day decide whether this story has any value or meaning for them. And as adults, if they want to participate in this story, I feel like they should probably come up with a more articulate answer. And Jeremiah helps me. This passage about the cracked cisterns has always been important to me, no matter what part of my faith journey I've been on. At first, it seems a little troubling, right? Because it seems a little old school, tribal, Bronze Age God, right? I'm the God of the Jewish people. I'm your tribal God. Who has ever heard of a tribe abandoning their God and going off and choosing another faith tradition? And how dare you? And if you do this, things are going to go bad for you. And you see that in the Old Testament, right? You see this, I'm your God. This is, exclusive. This is our people. Those people are bad. If you go over to those people, I'm going to smite you. And that's in the Old Testament, and it's rough, right? So when you look at it at face value, Jeremiah, at best, you can ask the question, is this passage useful at all in the 21st century? And at worst, is it dangerous? Is this, there's all been kinds of religious violence and war and genocide based on these passages and this kind of thinking. Is this something that we need to have in the liturgy, right? I think it is important because I think we need to look at it with a different hermeneutic and a different way of interpreting it. Because I don't really see it as one religion, one faith tradition as against another. I see it more as the search for truth versus idolatry. I kind of want to unpack that a little bit because religion and faith are universal. One time I was watching an interview with the author and scholar Reza Aslan, and I'm sure he didn't come up with this metaphor himself, but he was using it, and I really liked it. He said, religion is a language. When we're speaking to each other and I'm trying to communicate an idea to you, I need to use language. And so I happen to use English because that's the language that I know and that I'm familiar with. And especially I'm going to use that language if that's the language that you're comfortable with. But English is no better than Spanish, and Spanish is no better than German, and German's no better than Korean. It's just tools to express an idea. And Reza Aslan was making the point that religion and faith, whether it's Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, whatever faith tradition you come from, that these are just languages to express this idea of truth. And when you look in the Old Testament, even though you do see the tribal, Bronze Age, Iron Age, God, some kind of thing going on, the story is always wanting to break out and be universal. Yahweh is always wanting to include other people, non-Jewish people, to be more universal. That this is a universal thing. And then you also see it in names and metaphors, right? The Bible can't come up with a name for God. He and she is always, Yahweh or Elohim. They're always using different names, and also metaphors. The metaphors used in the scriptures to talk about who God is or what God is or what she and he may be about. It's like a toolbox, and the authors are always trying to pull out these different metaphors because we're talking about truth, and we're talking about what's infinite, and it's really the search for truth. But idolatry is something different. When you look at when idolatry is talked about in the Old Testament, you're talking about a God that you can put in your pocket. You're talking about a God that you can put on a shelf, that you can put in a closet. And when we do this, and we can do this in many different ways, we often project ourselves onto whatever we're calling God. And so it's really no longer a search for truth. It's really just a worship of ourselves. And when we project, we don't often project. We have good things in us. We, as human beings, there is much good in us. And if we wanted to project, even if we were projecting ourselves, we can project what's good in ourselves, but we often don't. We project what's dangerous and what's damaging. And that's when you look at the cultic practices when they're talking about idolatry. You see things like sexual assault and sex trafficking in worship. You see economic injustice and economic disparity. You see violence and murder and all kinds of terrible things happen because it's just human beings worshiping ourselves. And when we worship ourselves, things do not go well. I feel like this is a temptation in America. And I feel like this is a temptation for myself. Because the search for truth is difficult but beautiful. All right? And God, in this passage, Jeremiah, God is a river of life. The Spirit is a river of life. And it takes work and effort to try to connect and try to find this in our crazy world, but we can become like a creek or a tributary that's coming off the river of God. But a lot of times we become overwhelmed with this search. And we get distracted by all the things that our world offers us. And so instead of that, we often just dig our own cistern. We dig our own well, and we don't want to be a part of that river. But the cistern and well we dig, it doesn't hold water. And I feel tempted to do that. And the way I do that is I get so overwhelmed and I'm like, I don't want to know the greater story. I don't want to know about helping people. I'm getting overwhelmed with all the problems and all the things, and I just want to be happy. And I just want to have a good time, and I want to be content, and I don't want to have anxiety, and I want to have pleasure, and I want to really worship myself. And I really, I don't feel like I'm partying or I'm being a hedonist, but I really am in some ways. Like I just want to, just leave me alone, let me be an island unto myself, and I'll just have a good time. But that life doesn't hold water. And that's what our culture sees. We're so connected, but not connected. And we're all digging these wells and searching for happiness, and nothing holds water. I think it's interesting when Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, he often talks about a wedding banquet and a feast. And he's not, if Jesus is anything, he's just not subtle. That's just lost on him. He wants you to know that we're a family, and that this is a community affair, and that we're a community. And it's interesting to me that he says, when you're at the banquet, do not take the highest seat. Do not think that you're better than others. And oftentimes, I'm tempted to go it alone in my search for truth, in my search for meaning, in my search for joy, in my search for happiness, and I'll isolate myself from community. But when I do that, what I'm saying is, I don't need you guys. I am insightful enough, I am self-aware enough, I am enlightened enough that I can find meaning to my life, and I don't need to find it in a community. And that's nothing, and I can't speak universally. But I can only speak for myself. When I go there, that's just pride, right? To say that I can find truth and not be connected to other people. And also what's interesting to me in this story is he says, you can have community, but you can mess up by hand selecting your community. He says, why would you have a luncheon? Why would you have a dinner and invite your brothers and your sisters and your family and your friends and the people that are like you? And oftentimes, what we do in our culture is we hand select our community to be an echo chamber of people that I know are like me. And what happens when we do that is God becomes a hood ornament on whatever vehicle or worldview we're driving in the world. He becomes a mascot that christens and baptizes whatever we've already decided. And Jesus said, no, we need to make sure that all voices are included. He said, you go out and you get the blind. You get the lame, you get the poor, you get the crippled. He was listing off all the people that were marginalized in his time. And he says the same to us. He said, you cannot handpick your community. All voices have to be welcome. And so if I had to tell my children why we go to church, is that I'm worried that we will be tempted to follow the American dream of individualism and consumerism and consumption, and we will not find happiness. And we will not find joy, and we will not find purpose. And I feel like the way for us to find joy and purpose as meaning is to make sure that we hear other voices. And not only do we hear other voices, that we hear all voices, no matter of your sexual orientation, no matter what gender you identify with, no matter what's the pigmentation of your skin, and no matter what socioeconomics you come from, no matter what even political persuasion you come from, that in a community where all voices are heard, we find truth. And that's why I love you guys. And that's why COS is awesome.